Has this ever happened to you? Just minding your own business, and now you're stuck on an alien planet. Understandably, for most people, this would be a bit unfortunate. But maybe we should take a closer look at this planet. Maybe it isn't all bad. This planet is filled to the brim with useful resources. Of course, assuming you can build a factory from scratch. And of course, assuming you can keep the natives out of your new home. The planet even has those funny green rocks. That should help. But what's this on the very end? Belt immunity. Hey, now, no, you put that down. No! Maybe this planet isn't so great after all. Hello, it is me, the Broccolisk. If you're still confused after watching that short intro segment, this is a playthrough where I cannot use any belts. But before we do anything else, I want to get ahead of you on one thing. Before any of you comment, if you're not using any belts, why haven't your pants fallen down? This isn't very authentic. Have you guys ever heard of suspenders? Try putting them on and then suspending your disbelief. Now that we are all in agreement that we won't be leaving a comment like that on the video, let me give you a quick list of my goals. First off, as you may have guessed from the fact that I cannot place any belts, this is a modded playthrough. Also, if you have eyes, you've seen that things are not how they should be. This is because of Renai transportation, which was included simply to make things a bit more interesting. Just about all of the other mods are just quality of life improvements. And I will try to remember adding a card like this whenever they become relevant. And secondly, the end goal of the run is to launch 2 rockets, at the same time of course, for style points. And thirdly, no bots at all. What's the point of playing without belts if you're just going to play with belts 2.0? And lastly, I want to avoid some of the more conventional solutions to a lot of the game's problems. For example, solar panels, accumulators and laser turrets. But of course, being unable to use transport belts is going to make most things unconventional. I think it's about time we just get started. And let's start all of this off by admitting something that's a bit embarrassing. According to Steam, I have several thousand hours of playtime. And this run is the run I finally realized you can open the parts of your ship wreckage like chests. I always assumed you had to deconstruct them to get the resources. I mean, it makes sense. You mine rocks, you get rocks. You mine your metal ship, you get metal parts. And now let's just get this early part over with because it's just not interesting. Oh, and look at this. The first appearance of a thrower inserter. The sensible thing would be to put my boilers over by the coal patch. But as I've already told you, the goal here is not to be sensible. As the game kindly informed me just now, I've made my first red signs. If you've never seen such a message in a game, it's because it's from the Milestones mod. It's a pretty nice mod that just keeps track of your achievements throughout the playthrough. You can even configure it yourself in a variety of ways. For example, you can have it congratulate you every time you make an iron plate. I am nothing if not full of good ideas. Time to research automation so we can actually get somewhere. Success! And now, next up is linguistics. This is to better negotiate with my neighbors, who are without a doubt going to be angry about my pollution. You better brace yourself because I'm about to spend over 100 seconds talking about pollution. And here it is, the map I'm currently playing on, and here is our pollution. The pollution is made by your buildings. Okay, that might have been a bit too much crash and not enough course. When your building is working, it builds up pollution in the chunk it's currently placed in, and the pollution will then try to diffuse into nearby chunks. This isn't very interesting. Anyone who has ever smelt a fart across the room knows how this works. Let's instead talk about something that's more interesting and useful. Like how pollution goes away. First, let's talk about the chunks themselves. Every chunk consumes pollution based on its terrain type. However, the difference between grass and desert is only about 20%. But try to keep in mind that concrete absorbs 0. If you're feeling a bit of regret paving over your entire factory, don't worry because the amount of pollution consumed by the ground is relatively small, at least compared to the other 2 consumers. The first of which are trees. A healthy tree will consume 0.001 pollution per second. This sounds low, but you need just 8 trees to consume more pollution than a grass chunk. Considering how many trees there are in a densely forested area like this to the south, there'll be a huge difference to the desert area to the north. And now, the biters. If there's no pollution, they will leave you alone. But any pollution that's in their chunk will get added to a stockpile. This happens very fast, which is why you never see pollution on top of a nest. And they can then spend the pollution to buy units, which gets added to a group that attacks at random intervals. Long story short, the reason why you struggle with pollution in deserts is because there are few trees. I could go do all my smelting down in the forest, but that would be very annoying without belts. So I instead turned to plan B, which is violence. Look at that! Look what's happened while we were discussing non-war crime related topics. Would you call that automation? That would be a very generous description, but I guess it is. And here's something I'm going to be doing a lot. Hand feeding my machines. The first step on the long road to world peace. So, what to research next? I considered projectile damage, but at this point they're completely basic biters. How bad can it be? Instead, I'll research steel, because I like trains. I'm sure there's someone out there who's going, I know what you're doing. But for those of you that are not that familiar with Factorio, let me show you something. Let's take it a step further. While this might seem useful, I'm seeing a slight problem here.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
Just like with bots, if I'm not going to use belts 2.0, I'm not going to use belts 0.5. And don't any of you try to argue that a train used normally is a belt. A train used normally is a train, and a cargo wagon used like a belt is a belt. But anyway, trains are still far off. My current concern is biters. Pollution is spreading quickly in this direction, so I'm going to preemptively go tell them that solicitors are not welcome. It's a good thing the fish on this planet are made out of health potions. Okay, so this is kind of taking a while. I'll admit it's been a long time since I've tried to take down a biter nest this early in the game. And I might also have been a bit optimistic when it came to ammo. I think they got the message by now, so I'll just head home and call it a success. Well, I'm out of ammo, so it's time to see if they speak pickaxe. Okay, let's never speak of this again. I guess it's back to a humble life of hand-feeding machines for me. But then again, what if I just brought more bullets? Man, who would have guessed that that would be the solution? Unfortunately, that's not the only nest I have to take care of. But this time, I'm gonna bring a shotgun. Something I do at least once every time I start a new game of Factorio. It's just never the solution. I even ran out of fish this time. And sometimes you just have to accept that it's time for turrets. I mean, if those assholes are making them, then so should I. Okay, that's turrets finished. What should I go for next? Well, looking back at those encounters, I'm going to need funny bounce pads. Turrets, of course, being incredibly slow to produce, should be made in an assembler. And now we wait. Research. This time, of course, I'm going to go for logistics. Well, I see that there is a reason why I'm researching logistics, but still, surely I'm not the only person who looks at my own gameplay recordings thinking, who let this guy play? To be fair, turrets are pretty good, so I guess it's not strictly necessary to research more damage. Now here's a great quality of life mod for you. The inventory repair mod automatically repairs buildings in your inventory if you also have repair packs. And, while on the topic of mods, here's why I researched logistics. Nanobots is going to be my substitute for construction bots. Unlike construction bots, this one needs a supply of a special ammo type to work. Outside of that, the functionality is pretty much the same. You might not like it, but this is what peak power infrastructure looks like. We're of course going to need a lot of electric mining drills in this playthrough. So let's get started on them by putting up a temporary assembler here. Okay, so an update on that. I just checked my last save and this is my only production of drills. And yes, it still had to be hand-fed. Let's see if we can't use some of those drills to improve our iron production. Pretty normal so far. I'm not sure I like where this is going. Wow, look at that. That's the proper way to commit an atrocity. The mod that lets me evenly distribute items across buildings is called even distribution. You know, so far, these mods have been pretty good at describing themselves. Copper production is due for an upgrade next. No, don't touch that. Stop! If you don't have kids and wonder what it's like, give this a try. These hatches in Renai transportation can be added to buildings to let your thrower inserters throw directly into the building. And to avoid any more mishaps with the coal line, I'm replacing the inserters with bounce pads. Now I'm going to have to talk about these bounce pads for a moment. You see, you can adjust how far the bounce pads bounce items, but only to 5, 10 or 15 tiles, which gives the bounce pads enormous dead zones. If you were to bounce an item on the bounce pad on the lower left, no matter how you set up the rest of the bounce pads, the item will ever only be able to reach the green squares. Is this annoying? Incredibly. This means if you're ever using bounce pads, you should start at the end and build your way backwards. I'm trying to get some green circuit production set up, because, well, when do you not need green circuits? That's another step closer to trains. Wait, one moment. So it turns out I have the early trains mod installed. It just makes trains easier to research. This doesn't really change anything since I had to automate green signs before I can build trains anyway. But trains is starting to get really close now. Okay, I'm gonna have to go figure out those iron plates now. So far, it feels like just about everything I made barely works. And this, I'm sure, is going to be more of the same. Okay, I think this will work. Never mind. Those are the wrong inserters. Those are the wrong inserters again. Okay, finally. We have green circuits now, but that's just the first step towards green science. I have no desire to deal with whatever my current iron smelting setup is. So I'll just set up something new over here for the iron I need for green science. This is gonna take a while, so let's put on some chill music. Compared to all the horrible things I've built so far, this one is absolutely beautiful. It was admittedly a very low bar, but still, I very much like it. Now I just have to figure out how to get all the inserters in one place. And now we have to set up bulk production. We still need them for green science, even if we can't use them for anything else. And that's enough. Now we just have to get the belts and inserters in roughly the same place. And there we go! Green science! Now we just have to get these into the lab. With the green science working, I now have to route in some iron plates for the red science. The red science also need copper plates, but I'll fix that later. But now, I've stayed focused on this for over half an hour. I think I deserve a little treat. Ooh, science! This upcoming research is why I needed green science in the first place. It lets me adjust the range on my thrower inserters. I really have to do something about my iron smelting, which is why this current research is so important. I guess I never mentioned display launcher. It's not really something I'm going to be using, but I guess I can show you a quick clip that explains just about everything you need to know. Now I can tell my inserters to throw items less than 15 tiles, but before that let's start a new research. I included the large lamp mods to make it easier for the viewer to see what's going on at night, and these lamps do a pretty good job of that. Now spoiler alert, later I'll remember that I'm not going to use solar panels at all, so there's absolutely no reason for me not to use the console command and turn off nights entirely. I've discovered a small problem with my inserter production. The thrower inserters on the left side sees an open space in the chest, so of course it throws an item to fill it. However, the normal inserters also see that open spot and fill it before the item can land, and spills out on the ground. I do a quick fix on this by connecting the normal inserters to the chest with a red wire, and setting them to only be enabled if the number of items in the chest is lower than 200. I know that this seems like a very minor thing, but the reason why I'm showing this is because this will happen a lot, and I don't want to bring it up every time it happens, partially because it's not interesting to see me fix it so many times, and partially because sometimes I just don't bother fixing it and I just let it go. So if you ever see a chest surrounded by a load of crap, just remember that it was a conscious choice I made to be lazy. So, now that I have the necessary technology to fix my iron smelting, it's finally time to double my science output. And it's at this point I want to talk to you all about ADHD. It's a nightmare to edit my footage because I'll be working on one big project, for example, and then suddenly get struck by a thought and do something else for a half an hour. And if you're unsure if I'm talking about a playthrough or me editing the video right now, it's both. It also makes me incredibly good at procrastinating. I researched the ability to adjust throw range and circuit specifically to fix my iron smelting setup. Instead I just run off and set up some radars, build more labs for some reason, set up some temporary assemblers to make engines that I don't need for a while, and since I built more labs I need more iron for my science setup, I built one of those big lamps so we can see what's going on at night. Build some more biters, I'm not sure why. Do some more research. Oh shit, I'm finally researching projectile damage. Have you ever looked at this damage research upgrade and gone, yes, it gives 10% bonus to bullets, turrets and shotgun shells? That makes sense. But wait, turrets don't have damage stat of their own. They just deal damage based on the magazine you put in them. Does that mean you get a 10% damage upgrade to your magazines and then another 10% when you put it into a turret? Yes! Let's see how this affects our damage against biter nests. A turret with a normal magazine does 5 damage. With 1 damage upgrade it does 6.05. A biter nest has physical damage reduction, which first reduces damage by 2 and then by 15%. So while at first glance this upgrade might not seem that significant with just 10% damage increase, this is actually a 35% increase for turrets against biter nests. Assuming, of course, that I did the math correctly, which I usually don't. And now you're probably thinking, haha, funny joke. He got distracted and went off on a tangent while talking about how easily he gets distracted. But the thing is that it wasn't meant as a joke, it just happened. Ever since I destroyed those first Python nests, I wanted to talk about how the damage increase affects turrets. So I was going through the footage looking for sections of me getting distracted, and then I saw that I finally started the damage increase research. I worked on that section about the damage increases for maybe half an hour before I realized what was going on. And you know what? It gets to stay, because it perfectly illustrates the point I was trying to make. Well, enough about all of that. As you can see, I finally started building my iron smelting setup. And as much as I would like to make a super condensed building montage, this relatively small build ended up taking more than an hour. And that doesn't include all the time I spent fixing small problems that showed up later. So instead I'm going to show you a future version of the build where I worked out most of the problems. And here it is. But before we begin... And here it is! But before we hang on. When I was recording this, I just turned down the volume on my PC so I didn't realize they were this loud. So, full disclosure, the save I loaded up to record this didn't have any iron ore left, so I used the console command to add in some more so you could see it actually working. I recognized that this might be a bit chaotic to look at, so I prepared some visual guides for you. First, the iron ore gets stored in this chest, and if there's space for the iron ore, it gets thrown into this one. And this chest has two inserters that can throw north or south into these smelters. On the south side, the finished iron plates will get stored in this chest for later use. On the north side, iron plates are instead sent to another smelter so we can get steel. And unlike the iron plates on the south side, the steel plates are sent to the chest on the right for storage before being used elsewhere in the factory. There is a problem with the design as you see it right here. The 6 chests in the middle all have their separate entry points. That means if one of those paths ever run out of iron ore, that's 4 smelters that doesn't work anymore. But that's a problem for someone else. Someone in the future. It's me. And lastly, you might be wondering, how is it that one inserter is feeding 2 different smelters? Well, hold on to your assholes because you're about to learn. The things I'll be going through in this section is number 1, what the throw range signal that's included in Renai's transportation actually does. Number 2, what game ticks are. And number 3, how to build a timer circuit. And if you're one of those that's too good for my cringe-ass tutorials, you can skip ahead to the end of the chapter or go to this timestamp. Let's get started with number 1. If you remember this research from earlier, now I can tell my inserters to throw items less than 15 tiles. What this research allows me to do is mouse over my inserters and press F and increment its range by 1. That part is very simple, but it also lets me use this special signal. If I attach a wire to my inserter and switch off this option so it isn't waiting for a signal to enable it, I'll use this constant combinator to add this special signal to my wire, and now I can choose what number I want this signal to contain. Notice that I choose to set this signal's value to 7, the inserter then reads the number contained in that signal, and will always set its range to be equal to that number. Next, let's go quickly over game ticks. If you've seen these FPS UPS numbers up in the right corner, which you by the way can turn on by pressing F4 and selecting this option, those numbers represent the number of frames per second and the number of updates per second your computer is currently able to produce. One in-game second of Factorio represents 60 updates. If your factory grows to a point where your computer can no longer produce 60 updates per second, Factorio can't skip any of those updates, so it instead slows the game down to whatever number your computer can produce. For example, if your computer is only able to produce 30 updates per second, the game will run at half speed. By the way, what do you think about those lamps? There are 60 of them and the game turns on a new one every game tick. In other words, every cycle is equal to 1 in-game second. You can easily make something like this using a timer circuit. Wait, was that a segue? And here you have it, a timer circuit. If you've never worked with circuits before, you might be surprised at how simple it is. If you look over on the right, you can see it counting away. And it's counting really fast, so let's pause time in-game so you can better tell what's going on. When I advance time by 1 game tick, you can see that the input and output signal goes up by 1. So let's take a look at this constant combinator and this decider combinator and see what's going on. The constant combinator is very simple, it's just outputting a C signal with a value of 1. The decider combinator looks at all the C signals and adds their values together. And then asks, is this number less than 10? And if the answer is yes, then output that number in a C signal. And now for the most important detail. If you look at the wires, there's a wire going from the output side to the input side. Now, if you put everything down here, we can see what's going on tick by tick. We're going to assume that we just turned it on and this is the first game tick. The decider combinator has been tasked with checking the C value and see if it's lower than 10. It takes the total value of the C signals connected to its input side, and since we just turned it on, it's currently only receiving a value of 1 from the constant combinator. Since the conditions are fulfilled, it will output the total value of C. And now we can finally see the reason why we needed to talk about game ticks. Because a combinator reading a signal and outputting a signal is not instantaneous. And since Factorio is only ever going to update the world at most 60 times a second, there will always be a 1 tick delay between a combinator reading a signal and outputting one. In other words, the output side of a combinator is always 1 game tick behind the input side. So now let's go to the next game tick and see what happens. Now the combinator is outputting a C signal with the value of 1. And since we have a wire going from the output side to the input side, the combinator can see this signal. Now let's advance a few more ticks. The deciding combinator is constantly sending itself the result of the previous tick. But since we also have a constant combinator here, always sending a signal with the value of 1, the deciding combinator ends up counting upward. To illustrate, let's imagine the constant combinator suddenly disappeared. Well, that's interesting. Now that the combinator is only receiving information from itself, it's turned into a memory cell. It'll keep outputting the same number over and over until it receives something new. These are most commonly used in what's known as sushi belts. Now, obviously, I can't build any of those in this playthrough, but I will be making something that's kinda like a sushi chest. And now there's just one last part of this timer circuit to go over. But first, let's go back to before we remove the constant combinator. What is the point of asking the decider combinator if the number is less than 10? Let's count up to 10 and see what happens. What should the decider combinator do in this situation? It does the same check it always does. Is the total value of C lower than 10? And since the total value of C isn't below 10, the check fails and it outputs 0. And now the timer circuit is back to where it was when we first turned it on. Now let's see this happening in-game. I'll set the game to run at half speed to better see what's going on. As you can see, every 10th tick the output disappears. Now I'll connect this lamp to the output of the timer circuit with the green wire. The lamp has been set to check the C signal, and if the C signal is 0, turn on. It's important to note that I use the green wire to connect to the lamp. In almost all cases, you should avoid using the same wire that's handling the loopback. At the moment, the lamp is blinking every 10 ticks. By changing this value so the deciding combinator instead checks if C is lower than 60, the lamp will blink once every 60 ticks. So you can use this value to choose how often the timer should repeat. To get an estimate of what you should set this number to, remember that 60 ticks is equal to 1 in-game second. If I set the game to run at normal speed, you will see that it blinks once every second. Now, let's add the rest of the circuit used in my smelting setup. The top part is the timer, set to count 300 ticks before resetting. Then we have a decider combinator checking if the timer circuit's output is lower than 150, and if it is, output an S with the value of 1. Now we have an arithmetic combinator that multiplies any S signals it receives by 4, so it will output a 0 or a 4 depending on the previous decider combinator. And finally, an arithmetic combinator that adds the value of S and 10 and outputs that as a throw range signal. Now let's give this inserter something to do and let's see it work. Now we have an inserter that can switch between two targets. The two numbers to make special note of in the circuit is this 10 and this 4, where 10 represents the base range and the 4 represents the additional range to the second target. Now that we have a usable iron smelting setup, we can start automating engine production. And while I show you some clips of me setting up engine production, let me give you an idea of how slow and annoying it is to work with these things. This relatively short building segment you're watching right now is actually about an hour of me trying to find something that actually works. My hope is that once I get trains, I can start making some blueprints that are more efficient. But first we're going to need to get those engines. I reused the timer circuit from the iron smelting build, which resulted in this tileable design. The timer circuit is used to have the inserters alternate between throwing to the assemblers in front of them and the chest for the next assembler. In my opinion, the final result is actually looking pretty good. And here's a zoomed out view of what's going on in my factory at the moment. And yes, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So I've set up production for engines so I can get trains. Next step should be pretty obvious. The stone in my starting area is annoying me far to the north. I've already been up here once before to set up stone brick production, but if I also want regular stone to my base, the easiest way is just to set up another set of bouncers. When I finished building everything, I had a rare moment of clarity. I did the wiring on the inserters and stopped them from making a mess by overfilling the chest immediately. Good job, gold star. Now we just have to get iron and steel in the general vicinity of the stone chest. Am I making a huge mess of my factory in the process? Yes. But if you play a lot of Factorio, you know the rules. And the first rule is, in the starter base there are no rules. In this build I tried a different version of the timer circuit. It continuously counts up to a maximum of 150, and the arithmetic combinator takes whatever value it's currently on, divides that by 10, and outputs that as the range. The inserters don't want to throw if the current target can't receive the item. So I placed the power poles in the path to block them from throwing and making a mess. Stone and iron was provided with some simple chests on the left and right side. There we go, rails finished, good enough for me. Now that we have access to the rails and trains, there's just one more problem. I need space and these guys ain't sharing. It's been very difficult to find a common ground to communicate on, and my efforts always seem to devolve back into the universal language of violence. And luckily, I speak violence fluently. But we're not at that level yet. But I would like to make trains my primary medium of communication. I'm going to use this Bytonist as a test to see how viable it is. And of course, showing up with a normal cargo train isn't going to do much. So I've installed the Armored Trains mod. It adds a slow and heavy armored locomotive and several different weapons platforms. But loading the turrets is a bit weird. If you try to load the wagon it's on, nothing happens. That's because the turret and the wagon are two different entities. The gun on the wagon is just a normal turret that can float. And the wagon has no functionality outside of just telling the turret where it should go. Wait, do you hear that? Is that BFG division? I didn't realize this was actually going to be cool.
Yeah. Like that's ever gonna happen. What a load.
Sorry to get your hopes up, but that isn't what happened. When a train jumps in Renai transportation, the train that you see soaring through the air isn't the same train that just jumped. The train gets removed and replaced with a projectile that looks the same. And when it lands, it creates a train with the same properties and cargo as the one that jumped. So what's the problem? Well, the turrets are a separate entity from the train. So when the wagon lands, the turret that shows up is a completely new one with no ammunition. My hopes and dreams of delivering war crimes via airmail, crushed.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
Luckily, there's more than one way to deliver a train. Well, time to make some train depots. I'm going to be using a combination of the vanilla train scheduling and the logistic train network mod. If some of you are thinking, man, I wish I knew how the LTN mod works, then Sucks to be you, I guess. I was planning to make a few segments dedicated to helping people understand the LTN mod, but let me take a few moments to tell you what's going on in my life at the moment. It is currently September 24th. What you've seen so far is a few months of work. I'm most likely not going to have any time to work on this video in the first half of October, and Factorio Space Age is coming out on the 21st. I really should try to get this video out a few weeks ahead of that, and I still have 900 gigabytes of footage to go through. So any explanation of the LTN mod will have to be in a different video. Speaking of which, this is actually my first video. The microphone I'm using right now is actually bought over a decade ago when I first wanted to start making YouTube videos. But I ended up getting a pretty serious case of chronic fatigue caused by some unfortunate cell growths. So I'm really hoping for some feedback from you guys on whether or not this is something that's worth my time. And if you think it is, you probably already know of the 3 ways you can tell me. Let's get back to talking about these train depots for a moment. Building the depots themselves is something I've done before, and isn't that much of a problem anymore. But what is a problem is setting up the fuel distribution system. Not only is it a pain in the ass to get the fuel from the delivery train to the correct chests, but there's also a bug with how the inserters interact with the train rails. If an inserter ever ends up targeting a part of the track, then it gets stuck waiting for a train to show up on that track. And the only way to get it to stop waiting for the train is to remove that tile and replace it. I didn't notice that this was happening at the time, so if you see any inserters that don't work, that's probably why. I have arrived at this design which should work, but I don't know yet since I don't have access to coal. I decided to build my way up north and use this patch as my main coal source for my train network. I really didn't put a lot of effort into this mining setup, I just wanted coal connected to my network as soon as possible. And after setting up the train station, it's time to find out what's wrong. It seems to be loading the cargo wagon just fine. But when I returned to the depot, I realized I had forgotten to wire up the unloading station. Which, to be honest, was a lot more trouble than expected. If I were to do this again, I would have used a different system. And instead of having multiple inserters each throwing to a separate station, I'd instead try to have one inserter that adjusted its range depending on which depot needed fuel. But due to how the setup works here, I had to find a way to balance all the chests. On this first test, things are not going well. I didn't realize what was happening at the time, but it's all caused by that bug I mentioned earlier. I tried replacing one of the inserters with a blueprint copy of itself, which did fix the problem, but it also confused me. So I tried doing that with all the inserters, which fixed the problem. And of course, solving one problem causes 2 more. The first one being that biters are destroying my coal mine. Which means it's time to get out the can wagon and repay the favor. That was quick. I decided to go find their nest, so I could persuade them to leave me alone. And on my way there, I found this huge patch with 17 million copper. And soon after that I found their nest. While they had produced a lot of units, they didn't put up much of a fight. This led me to another patch, this time with 25 million iron. Unfortunately, its positioning is very annoying to defend. And now for my second problem, which is that my chest balancing isn't working at all. So I redid all the circuitry, and this time it seems to be working. Next up on my to-do list is oil. Now that I'm building a lot of rails, if I want to stay sane, I need cliff explosives. When I started this run, I knew that without bots, I would have to return to base very often to find items I need. So I included some mods that will help me get back to base faster. This first one is a grappling hook. It works just as you expect. It does use ammunition, so be careful not to run out in the middle of the desert. This train stop you see here is one I was using a lot when I was playing space exploration. It can hold 3 trains at a time, with 2 cargo wagons each. One at the station and one at the entry and exit side. And it's really easy to fit on any piece of straight track you have. But if you ever put a station like this on a busy track, you should take some precautions. If a train isn't able to exit out of the loop back onto the main rail, things can lock up. To prevent something like that from happening, make sure to limit the train station to only accept 2 incoming trains at once, and use circuitry to give the exiting train priority. Notice this highlighted wire. It goes from the train signal right out of the stop to the train signal down on the main rail. On the signal by the train station, we've set it to read signal. This makes it so it sends a signal to the wire with whatever color it currently is. And the train signal on the main rail is set to close the signal if the conditions are met. And the condition is that the wire contains a red signal. And now, if there is a train anywhere in the exit section, the first train signal turns red, which fulfills the conditions of the second train signal, which also turns red. And now, trains on the main rail will have to wait for the exit section of the loop to be empty before they can continue. Since all my oil is in the middle of the forest, I don't have to worry about pollution. With my first shipment of oil ready, I hitch a ride back to the base. I hadn't quite figured out how I wanted to set up my production of cliff explosives, so I just went and did something else. So I ended up setting my sights on the copper patch I found earlier. I couldn't really start mining there before I had secured the area and built a wall. At this point, I'm about 12 hours into the playthrough, and of course I'm way behind where I would usually be at this time, and it's really starting to show when I'm using normal ammunition against these stronger enemies. After clearing out some of the most problematic biter nests, I head back to the copper patch. The most reasonable way to defend this copper patch is to wall off this choke point and kill all the biters on my side of the wall. I unfortunately don't have any walls, but I do have a train that's starting to get really long. So I figured, why don't I just make a loop in the choke point and have the train patrol for me? Spoiler alert, there's two reasons why. First of all, the train is really heavy and runs out of fuel very quickly. And secondly, if the train is going too fast, the turret isn't able to lock onto its targets. When I'm talking about the train using up its fuel very fast, it actually takes a bit over 20 minutes. Now 20 minutes might not sound that bad, but I would now like to reveal to you how long this playthrough was. That means for the rest of the playthrough, this train needs to refuel 200 times. And that's not to mention the fact that there's 4 locomotives, which will consume something like 200,000 coal. So I ended up doing the reasonable thing, just making the train longer and parking it in a defensible location. And now I had to figure out a better solution for mining in copper than what I had previously done with the coal. While prototyping, I'm using electric furnaces. That's because you're not allowed to place down drills if there's no ore, and since these have the same dimensions, I'm using them as a substitute. Since the bounce pads can only bounce 5, 10 or 15 tiles, they are really annoying to work around, resulting in a weird staggered pattern on the buffer chests. This could have been avoided if I used normal thrower inserters, but I had decided to try out the ejector hatches, and they can only fire items exactly 20 tiles. At this point I've reached a design that should work in theory, but I know that if one of these chest groups runs out of ore, the station won't be able to load the train properly and cause a lot of problems. So to avoid problems down the line, I set up a system to balance the chests. But before I show you the finished design, I have great news. I finished the cliff explosives. The design ended up being nothing special. Actually, that's not true. It ended up being special, but in the wrong way. The design is mostly hand-fed, but I figured, how often do I really need cliff explosives? And now, I'm proud to unveil the finished design of my copper mine. While working on this build, I had to add more and more wires, and by the end, it looked like a bunch of Christmas trees. But it does do what it's supposed to, and make sure that the chest groups contain roughly the same amount. And I added some flashing Christmas lights, and since composing music in Factorio isn't my strength, I went to factorio.school and searched for jingle bells. And hey, here you go, a blueprint with jingle bells. Thank you, Dina. Now I just have to copy the string and import it into Factorio. Ah, fuck. I wasn't about to let the fact that it used belts for timing stop me, so I started working on a timer circuit to substitute the belt. At this point, I really should have checked the wiki to see how fast items move across red belts. What I did instead was just YOLO it and set a 20-tick delay between each note, which in my opinion sounded a bit slow. But doubling the speed of the circuit was absolutely not the solution. So I took the output of the timer circuit, multiplied it by 4, then divided it by 3. I was afraid this would make it skip some of the numbers that would make the notes play. So I used the modulo function to make the last digit always 0, which messed up something because now it sounds very strange, and then when it looped, it stopped playing altogether. And then on the next loop, it started playing again, but this time skipping a lot of notes. I tried changing the modulo to 20, which certainly didn't help anything. To see what's going on, first let's spread the combinators out a bit. The signal comes from the timer circuit, which gets multiplied by 4, then divided by 3, and is then sent to 2 combinators. This one does the modulo function, which isolates the last digit, and the last combinator subtracts the last digit from our number. So this should work, right? Yes, it does, but only if you remember one important detail. A combinator always takes 1 tick to do its job, so the isolated digit always ends up being 1 tick behind. To fix this, you just add a combinator to delay the signal. How you set up this combinator isn't important, it just has to output the same number it received. And now that the operations are synced up again, it should work. Right about now you might be thinking, good job on fixing that circuit. Gold star. Well, according to Wolfram Alpha, I'm an idiot. Because if you take a sequence of number, multiply by 4, then divide by 3, you will never skip a multiple of 20. And right about now you might be thinking, dude, all of that was pointless, gold star revoked. And that's fair. So, I don't actually have anywhere for this copper to go, so I'll just leave it here. The guard train up in the choke point is slowly being eaten by biters, so I have to go build that wall now. Now we have to wait until we have enough walls. In the meantime, I experimented with some designs for copper and iron smelting. This one doesn't work, pretend like you never saw it. This one works, sometime in the future. Welcome to the future, it works now. I had to reduce the volume because it's incredibly loud. This design has a tendency to produce some pretty cool wave patterns. I've spent a lot more time than I care to admit just staring at it. At this point, I finally remember that if I want to build some decent defenses, I'm probably going to need some military signs. If you're looking at this and thinking, what a goddamn mess, good. If I want to make proper defenses without using laser turrets, I'm going to need some better ammunition. I'm going to need a lot of it, so it's very important I automate it as soon as possible. I of course don't do this, and instead run off and do what I always do when I get a migraine from this mode. And now it's finally time to build that wall I was talking about. What's that? You're wondering if I automated the ammunition production? No. And you're also wondering why I'm building the wall in a completely different place? Okay, now listen here. If I was at all capable of making reasonable decisions, at least some of the time, I wouldn't be sitting here at 1 AM frantically editing this video. And honestly, if I ever run out of medication for my ADHD, I'm probably going to revert into a primal state, disappear into the forest and never be seen again. So we're going to build this wall and would you look at that, it's finished. You might remember that there were 2 problems with using a train to guard a choke point. I have solved both problems. To solve the fuel problem, I have the patrol train stay at its own personal depot until the biters are there. The train is set to always go to 2 stations, one at each end of the wall. However, the other station is always disabled unless there's biters at the wall. And when biters come too close to the walls, some circuitry activates the other stations for 60 seconds. I think I heard someone ask, but how does it know? And for that we have flamethrower turrets. If you're from the future, you're probably thinking, oh, you just connect a wire to it. But no, that's something that's going to become available in Factorio Space Age. So for now, I have to find a workaround. And that workaround was these pipes from the fluid level indicator mod. But before I go any further, let me just say, this was a mistake. That is because these pipes can only fit 100 units of fuel. And the pumps in vanilla Factorio that I used to separate these pipes from the rest of the fuel line has an internal buffer of 400 units. This causes the system to be a bit unstable, and I really should have used normal fuel tanks in Factorio. Just to be clear, the pipes from the mod work perfectly, it's just that they shouldn't be used for this. And now let's talk about how we set up a circuit that knows that the turret is firing. Remember how I couldn't get Jingle Bells to play because I had an uneven amount of combinators? Well, I have two combinators, both of them are reading from the pipe. But one of them is reading from the pipe and sending to the other combinator. And that other combinator is now receiving the fluid level of the previous tick and the current tick. And if those two numbers aren't the same, well then surely there's something going on. So it sends a signal, which flips the switch, which causes the other train station to activate, which causes the train to patrol. But how do we make it so that the train doesn't just zoom past the biters without killing them? I did experiment with using separate stations for each wall section, but this caused the train to be too slow if there were multiple attacks along the wall. To make sure the trains weren't going too quick, I was using this mod by Schmidt, which adds speed limit signs to the game. Whew, that was close. If not for that fork in the road, I would have been screwed. Anyways, you can set these signs on the right side of the track to tell the train to limit its top speed. But of course, if you always limit their speed, they won't get to where you need them before it's too late. So it's a good thing that you can use circuitry to dynamically set the speed limit. So, when the circuitry detects a biter nearby, it sets a speed limit on the nearby sign. The signs, however, need their own circuitry, because if you use the circuitry that switches on the train station, they will stay active for way too long. So, we're going to need a train detector. So I came up with this design. It uses 6 signals to detect if a train is in the middle of it. If both the signals in the middle are red, that means that there's a train. This means that the train has passed and we can turn off the speed limit. And that should just about cover everything there is to know about this wall design. And since I made this design to be tileable, I can just copy this segment and bring it up to the other choke point. But before that, I actually went back to the base and finished my hammer production. In this current iteration, it's a bit simple. But in the future, I'll upgrade it with a circuit that lets it balance all the chests at the same time. Would you believe it took me just 20 hours to make my first solo plan? I was planning on not making any of them, but I'll make an exception for night vision. You know what? Time to build a wall. Never mind, I don't have enough landfill, so the wall will have to wait. At least I can show off the zipline functionality that's in Renai transportation. The upcoming footage of me building the wall probably speaks for itself, so enjoy a short break from my incessant voice. These red lines you're seeing are from the Belt Tracer mod, which, despite its name, also traces wires and pipes. And now, with a successful test run, we'll say the wall is complete. I guess it could use a bit more polish, but it's good enough for now. The fact that the biters can get inside the turret's minimum range might seem like an oversight, but I ended up doing this on purpose because flamethrower turrets are so strong that if placed correctly, they will kill all the biters before the train can reach them. And now, since I had to watch this atrocity, you need to as well. My coal mine can only supply trains with 2 cargo wagons. But the design I made earlier for copper and iron processing needs 5 cargo wagons. And here it is, finished, maybe, I don't know, I never used it. You see, while building it I learned an important lesson. If you don't have access to transport belts, using trains with 5 cargo wagons is stupid. So I decided to just stick with trains with 2 cargo wagons. Which, as it turns out, if you don't have access to transport belts, using trains with 2 cargo wagons is stupid. As a pallet cleanser, here's something that's not as stupid. It's the auto-balancing for my ammo production. Let's just hope that the fact that I am currently 24 hours into this playthrough has made the biters too strong. There was a version of these wagons with a rock turret. That might help. That was somehow even worse. You know what? Let's just forget about the train for a while. Let's do something useful instead. If you see something over to the right, ignore it. It was a mistake we don't need to talk about. Let's instead talk about what's going on this side, the lesser of my 2 mistakes. I modified my design to instead work with 2 cargo wagons, and then built one for iron and one for copper. But ever since I built them, something just feels wrong.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Let's see if we can figure out what's going on. What we're looking for is unusually large numbers. It seems Factorio is using a lot of time updating the modding scripts. Now we just have to find out which one. And there we found our culprit. Let's try and see if we can find a solution. Let's start by removing any inserters we don't need. That did actually help a little bit. It doesn't hurt to try restarting the computer as well. That also seems to have improved things a little bit. Unfortunately, what's up next is steel production. With steel production finished, the hit to our performance seems minimal. I just looked at the time. It's midnight, I have 72 hours left. I went to bed, I have 62 hours left. If we want to get a rocket into space, we're going to need a lot of green circuits. At this stage in the playthrough, I was experimenting with city block designs. But it turns out if you don't have access to transport belts, city block designs is a bad idea. They simply end up taking way too long to design. They're also usually reliant on timer circuits to set their range, which, as I discovered after finishing the run, is the main cause of my performance issues. I ended up making 2 more city block designs before realizing it wasn't feasible. One for plastic, and one for red circuits. I guess I also made this one for sulfur and acid, but since it doesn't destroy my performance, I'm not going to speak badly of it. And now, unfortunately, after 33 hours, I had to pronounce my initial iron patch dead. I am still dependent on this base for producing all my stuff, so I replaced the miners with a train station to deliver iron ore. And now you will get to see one of my rare good decisions. It's a tileable, easily configurable station that can be used to make anything. And it comes in 4 different flavors, depending on how many ingredients whatever you want to produce needs. I put in place circuitry to make sure the chests are balanced at every step. It did get a while to get this design to work properly, because if the chests are unbalanced, the trains won't load or unload properly. And this is because if you don't have access to transport belts, using trains with 2 cargo wagons is stupid. But at least now that I have these designs, I can easily create and modify my production lines. And that should really speed up the rest of the playthrough. I say, despite there being 50 more hours of this. This increase in production of course comes with more pollution, which means I have to ensure my factory is walled in on all sides. It would be a bit overly ambitious to expect a train to patrol such a long wall. So we need to make a design that can automatically resupply and tile. Making the blueprints tile correctly is usually a pretty annoying affair, something the developers already know. So in the upcoming Space Age update, they have added the ability to adjust your grid alignment while holding the blueprint. This is something I'm very much looking forward to. The amount of walls I need, however, isn't just going to manifest out of thin air. So there's going to be a lot of placeholder tracks while I finish the rest of the build. The forest being this dense on the south side has been very helpful so far. And of course, in my usual infinite wisdom, I made the decision that the train that resupplies the turrets along the wall should use 3 cargo wagons. This was filmed months ago, and I still remember the horrible migraine I got from trying to figure this out. It turns out that balancing the cargo delivery is very difficult. Well, it's difficult if you only have inserters, of course. And after about an hour of this, I just went to bed. Which, to the surprise of no one, fixed everything. And now I just have to figure out how to actually get the ammo on the train. And this of course turned into a whole ordeal of me trying to find a way to get train tracks into the middle of my base. I did eventually figure out something that worked, but was I happy with it? No. And then I remembered I do have something I can use here. I could just use one of those train ramps to jump over the station. And if I just use one of those signs to limit the train speed, it should work every time. Perfect. After some major adjustments, I got it working properly. Most of the time. And after remembering to actually set a speed limit, everything worked. By having all the stations along the wall share the same name, I can have the train cycle between going to a station to resupply with ammunition and going back to gather more. And the train station is wired so that if it sees there are 600 magazines in the chests, it turns itself off. So the next time it won't be allowed to stop there. What was that? I had completely forgotten that these speakers were set to play music globally. And if you're wondering, I have played for 24 hours since the last time a train stopped at that station. The following segment, originally dedicated to clips of me building the wall, has been deemed too interesting. Please enjoy the following clips of Factory ASMR instead. Finally, blue signs. Here's a fun fact for you. Before I started the run, I put the estimate on how long it would take under 40 hours. Finally having science production automated feels pretty good. But my growing factory is starting to tax my power production, which is not helped by the fact that my coal supply is running low. If your factory runs out of power, things can go south really quickly. But I do have another coal patch I can set up miners on right away. Experienced players know how important it is to stay ahead on these things, You don't want to keep building more power-hungry machines that risk putting you in the notorious Factorio death spiral. What was I doing again? Oh, that's right, the coal miners. I hope I'm not forgetting anything important right now. You probably thought I was building up towards my factory running out of power. But in reality, I was just waiting to finish researching nuclear reactors. And to be fair, until a few moments ago while I was sitting here editing the video, I thought I was doing the same thing. So don't feel bad if you didn't trust me to do the correct thing, I didn't either. But of course, if we want nuclear power, we're going to have to make some preparations. But first, let's do something I should have done long ago. There we go, no more nighttime for the rest of the playthrough. I don't doubt for a second that there's some sort of damn creature out there that's watching the video right now thinking, this makes you a cheater and the run is invalid. Fine, but at least I won't be a cheater in the goddamn dark. Okay, so I have to talk about this. I tried googling damp creature just to see what would show up, and this Yu-Gi-Oh card was a top result. And to anyone who plays Yu-Gi-Oh, I have several questions. Why does your card game have a moisture creature? Why is the moisture creature light elemental and not water? Why does it have stats roughly equal to that of a dragon? And why does every single Yu-Gi-Oh card I've ever seen have the image quality of a meme re-uploaded to the internet every single day since 2007? Why is it that whenever I see a Yu-Gi-Oh card, I am subjected to atrocities beyond human comprehension? That's all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's get back to the reactors. If we want a steady supply of uranium-235, we're going to need some centrifuges. And of course, we're going to need to process some uranium ore. Processing the uranium ore in the centrifuges gives us the uranium-238, and also has a very small chance of giving us the uranium-235. We are going to need to get 40 of those. But the odds of getting them are so low that on average you're going to have to process 57,000 uranium ore. So start this part of the process as early as possible. Once we have 40 of them, we can use them to make more. But to do that, we need to research the Kovarex enrichment process. So it's time for purple science. And my factory has just lost power, so any faith you had in me was misplaced after all. I guess it's time to just go and do the thing I should have done 2 hours ago. The research is nearing completion, so I'm setting up the centrifuge that's going to run the Kovarex process ahead of time. Of course, running the Kovarex process is very slow, and every centrifuge that's running the process needs 40 uranium-235. So I'm instead going to use a lot of beacons and speed modules to speed up this one. And now we can just leave it alone until we have enough material to make nuclear fuel. Time to design a power plant. I've designed some power plants before, but they never end up looking any good. You know what? I'm just not feeling it. I think I'm just gonna go to Factorio.school and grab a blueprint with a nice square footprint. This one seems pretty efficient. I'm gonna have to modify those chests. This design was originally shared by Sukivi on Reddit 8 years ago. I looked up the post so I could properly credit him. And while editing now, I just read some of the comments and I guess I can kinda see it. But to be fair, you kinda have to squint really hard. And even then it kinda feels like a stretch to me. And now that we have access to half a gigawatt of power, it's time to expand. But unless I want to completely destroy my UPS, I should use a different blueprint than what I've been using so far on the mines. But the approach I'm considering is going to be a lot slower than what I'm currently using. But I'm willing to make some sacrifices if it means less lag. To offset the slowness, I'm going to invest in some speed modules. But it's important to ask yourself, is the 20% speed increase from the tier 1 modules really going to make me happy? And the answer is no, not when I know there are tier 3 modules with a 50% speed increase. Now, admittedly, it's going to make the run a bit longer, but surely not like 20 hours longer. While we're talking about things that might make this run a lot longer than it needs to be, I mentioned a while ago that using trains with 2 cargo wagons was a bad idea. And it all comes down to the fact that the cargo wagons need to be balanced. You would think that if two wagons were being loaded by the same number of inserters, they would end up in the same number of items. But from what I've seen, that just doesn't seem to be the case. If the trains keep delivering unbalanced loads, it might cause problems down the line. It could, for example, cause a train to be unable to unload all its items. And if that happens, you have to go manually unload it. Because if that train gets a task to deliver something else, not only will it deliver the leftover items from the previous task, it will also have less room in one of the wagons to deliver the correct items, compounding the issue. And my solution to this was to have the trains only transport loads that are big enough to fill both wagons. Now let's say you have 4 stations that need green circuits. Green circuits have a stack size of 200, which means that they won't deliver any green circuits before you have 16,000. And you will need to produce 64,000 before all 4 stations get their shipment. And that leads us to the blue circuits. To make just one blue circuit, you need 20 green circuits and 2 red circuits. And 2 cargo wagons can fit 8,000 of them. And waiting for 8,000 blue circuits is, needless to say, incredibly inefficient. It would have been really nice to just go back in time and tell myself to use just one cargo wagon. It would have made this last part of the playthrough so much easier. Since we're going to need a ridiculous amount of green circuits, I created a separate blueprint just for them. This first version of the blueprint, despite using subpar components, can produce about 500 per minute. But just by upgrading the assemblers you can reach about 1000. The alarm is sounding for my nuclear power plant. This sounds very dramatic, but it's just telling me that it needs more iron plates to make the fuel. Well, it was exciting for a little while at least. Behold, I have acquired a jetpack. Can you guess what the mod is called? What a surprise! And here you can see the reason why the playthrough is over 20 hours longer than it needed to be. Since I'm struggling so much on the UPS front, I went with this design, which is more UPS friendly. It is, however, not very efficient. And I crave efficiency. A grave mistake. And honestly, what was I even thinking? The entire premise of the run is that it's inefficient. And now I've decided that these should all have tier 3 modules. And how expensive are those? Well, remember how I complained about how expensive blue circuits are? Every single module will need 30 of those. And this set of miners will need 48 modules. That's about 1,500 blue circuits just for these. Well, it's too late to do anything about that now, so let's instead talk about what I'm building here. Since this type of miner design is reliant on the train just sitting there waiting for the miners to fill it up, I don't really want it to be a part of the logistic train network. So I want trains that are completely separate from the LTN network. They just sit at the mine, wait for full cargo, then come to these stations, where they unload the cargo over to stations that are part of the LTN network. And at this point in the video, while I wish I could say that the last 20 hours of my playthrough was interesting, it just isn't. Most of those 20 hours is just me doing what you're seeing right now. Moving items around, making small improvements here and there, and even if there was a lot of interesting stuff happening in these 20 hours, it's currently 5 AM on the 1st of October and I have to leave in 7 hours. Now of course, the final challenge of the run is that I want to launch 2 satellites at the same time. I have a few ideas about how I can do this. But do you know what would have made this a lot easier? If I had a really big chest. I'm not talking about boobs, by the way. I am talking about the things you can put your junk in it. Yeah, okay, that didn't make it any better. But you know what I mean, right? I've been using chests to store items this entire video. And Finally, here it is, the culmination of all my mistakes. I present to you the sushi ship. Finally, the unending torrent of bullshit has ceased. It's over.